And now the review starts for And Now the Screaming Starts. Well, very soon anyway. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Amicus reviews in my Amicus playlist. This movie is 51 years old, more than half a century, though I'm only just getting around to seeing it. So after a number of weirdly experimental full-length feature films over the years, I would have said Amicus just went full hammer for this one. Period piece, large mansion setting where the master of the house seems to have no job. Top hat and tails, horses and carriages, corset dresses, the works. So this is a kind of supernatural chiller. We've got this character, Charles, who is just moving his fiancée, Catherine, into the house at the start of the story, and then we quickly see them get married. But on the night of the wedding, Catherine gets raped by an evil spirit. In fact, let's just examine this scene for a moment. So Charles takes Catherine upstairs into the bedroom, and you would think that he would be ripping her clothes off at this point, because they've definitely not slept together before now, because the fact that Catherine is a virgin bride is actually part of the story. And you would especially think that he's keen to get on with it, given that Catherine is just walking around in these killer outfits morning, noon and night. But no, as soon as he's got her in the bedroom, he leaves, goes to another room and just starts casually taking his jacket off and his other clothes off, and he's freshening up basically, but he's taking forever about it. You know, you'd think he'd want to get on with it, wouldn't you? And while he's out of the room, Catherine gets raped by the ghost. But even if that hadn't happened, I suspect she would have fallen asleep long before Charles actually gets back to the bedroom. But after this night, Catherine is haunted again and again by the same ghost who raped her, and she's the only person in the house having these experiences. So she doesn't just have to tolerate the hauntings in this film, she's also having to survive accusations of insanity, essentially. And another problem is that any time a character tries to give her any information about the curse that's in place here, that character will die because it's part of the curse. The rules of this film are kind of tricky to follow at times. This film was directed by Roy Ward Baker. He, of course, did one of my favourite horror films of all time, Asylum, and he also directed Vault of Horror, which I reviewed quite recently. And we've got a stellar cast. We've got Peter Cushing turning up halfway through to insert some much-needed zest into proceedings. I think it would have been ideal if he was playing a ghost hunter in this film, but sadly he's just playing like a psychiatrist, but still a good character, to be fair. We've got Ian Ogilvy playing Charles. I've definitely seen this guy in other films. We've got Herbert Lom, no introduction needed. And playing Catherine, we've got Stephanie Beacham, who I've previously seen in Dracula 1972 AD. I likely wouldn't have recognised her in this, but for the fact her name obviously came up on the credits, but she's got a different hairdo in this. She looks very different from that Dracula film. But despite all these impressive names, the film is highly problematic in a number of ways. So I guess after this forthcoming picture, I would have to say, and now the criticism starts. Before I say anything else, I did really enjoy the horror side of this movie. There's a really stifling atmosphere. There's a disembodied hand ghost, which is a real throwback to Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and at least one incredibly good kill. So I refer to the one where there's a woman running up some stairs and ghosts are coming out of the portraits. I thought that was really effectively done. But the trouble with this whole thing is that all the characterization and story has just been completely pushed to one side in favour of the horror. That's all the movie's interested in. And there is a clue with the title. You know, if you see a title like that, And Now the Screaming Starts, I guess you could predict safely that, you know, all the focus is going to be on the horror and not a lot else. But there's so much good stuff that's just abandoned here. I mean, at the centre of all this is a really good tale of a woman who's accused of insanity, but by the end it turns out that it's actually her husband who is the one who is susceptible to becoming insane. And I think it's hinted that he's carted off at the end of this, but the movie doesn't make that very clear or not. But the whole marriage between Charles and Catherine is just abandoned about a third of the way into this script. I don't think we see the two characters in the same room after the rape. Maybe it happens one or two times, but definitely not enough. This movie starts off as a story about Charles and Catherine, newlyweds, but at some point it just turns into a haunting film, and all the characters and their relationships with each other are just swept to one side. I feel like we should have seen scenes where we can identify where the marriage is breaking down. We can see where Charles blew it with Catherine by not being supportive when she comes to him with tales about, seeing ghosts and things. We should see when the relationship is starting to dissolve. I'm not even sure if these two characters are sleeping together by the end of this film, whether they're even still talking to each other. The whole relationship is just completely kicked out of the movie after a certain point. It's a real shame. There is a good atmosphere, like I said, though. This mansion, I think they did use it for some of the gothic horror films of the time. The Reptile is the only one that comes immediately to mind, but definitely some Hammer films. There are a couple of spots in this mansion, though, which are unique to this film, I think. One of them is the cool-looking balcony where you see all the portraits of Charles's ancestors, and the other would be the creepy-looking graveyard out back surrounded by a steel grill fence. It's really overgrown. I definitely think they needed to hire a gardener to look after that place a bit better. And God knows where the Silas character suddenly appears from when Catherine visits the graveyard. He just seems to pop up from behind a tombstone like a Jack-in-the-Box Michael Myers or something like that. I think twice in this film he does that. But this is another issue I have with this. Silas the Woodsman is a character we're meant to have a lot of empathy for because of his family's history. But actually, I just found myself not liking the character. I think it's the first scene he's in. He's being really obnoxious, refusing to take his hands out of the bucket. And from then on, I just couldn't like him. The only two characters I like in this, really, are Catherine and Dr. Pope, played by Peter Cushing. And even with Catherine, the script has done a huge disservice to her by not showing the effects that the hauntings are having on her marriage. And I would have liked a little bit more about her from before the story starts as well, but I guess we were never going to get that. But this film starts off as a tale about two newlyweds, a marriage, and then it's just completely abandoned. There are a few other weird things. So at one point, Catherine's mother suddenly pops up and says, "Right, that's it. We're going back to London. Pack your bags. No more of this funny business. We're out of here." And I'm just thinking, where did you come from? I mean, this character was in the horse and carriage at the start of the movie, but I would have presumed that after Charles and Catherine get married, the mother would have gone back to London, and that's the last we see of her. And yet, suddenly, here she is, acting like she's really offended by all the events of the past few days. And it's like that the script suddenly looked around for the next victim and was struggling a little bit, so thought, oh, I know, the mother from the start of the film, let's just pretend that she's been here the whole time, even though that wasn't really the intention. It's just a bit strange. Later on in the film, there's a flashback where we see Charles's grandfather maim Silas's grandfather, if I've got that right. And then just after, he comes up with the curse that the whole movie is based around. But he just comes out with this curse on the fly, and somehow it works. Like, he stood there in broad daylight going, "Right, I curse you so that blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de, and as soon as I stop talking, the curse will be active for all time." And of course it works, but I think they should have made it a little bit more complicated than that. Maybe he'll wait until night time and cast some kind of sacred spell using some mumbo-jumbo language, or have a Book of the Dead or something. They shouldn't make it something that people can try themselves after the film and then realise that it's complete shit, because you can't just stand up and say a curse and it'll come real. I'm quite certain that curses don't work that way, And there's one more weird moment I wanted to address. So this Silas character, I'm talking about the Silas character in the actual story now, not the grandfather from days gone by. Silas goes up to the house sometimes late at night and just stands outside. And I think this is because he wants to be close to Catherine because of the child she's carrying. But this is not his kid. It's going to look like Silas, but it's not his kid. So why he would stand outside the house really despondently, you know, they're cheating him out of his birthright, or, you know, cheating him out of his right to be a strange kind of stand-in father figure. It's another weird thing about the film. I still like the film overall, just for the horror elements, but certainly it's still a missed opportunity. This could have been a really great drama film and a great horror film at the same time, and they've only really got the horror mostly right. I mean, it's still one of Amicus's best full-length features up to this point, I would say, but it's not like there's been a whole slate of really good ones up until now. That the soundtrack's really good. I should definitely point that out. So I don't own a copy of this. I watched it on YouTube. There's a free version of the film on there. The only thing to say is I put it on my large TV to begin with, and it was kind of grainy and blurry. It wasn't very good to look at. I tried it on my phone, and it was much clearer, much sharper, albeit obviously I had to watch it on a much smaller screen. But my advice would be, if you're going to watch it on YouTube, try and watch it on a small screen. I don't know why YouTube finds it easier to give you a clearer picture on a smaller screen. I don't know how that works. I'm not really a tech guy. But as to whether I will ever buy the film in the future, the thing is, it's like £20 for like a Blu-ray for this, so it certainly won't be a priority with me going forwards, especially as the film is available on YouTube. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror and see how I'm going to score this? So we've got 1, 2, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. A very generous 3.5, I would suggest. But I did enjoy this as a horror film, and Peter Cushing's really good in it as well. So there we have it. I will leave it there for today, unless you want to stay an extra minute for my reading update. So I've just finished The Stand by Stephen King, all 1,400 pages of it. I've spent most of the last 2 weeks with my head buried in this book. It's an incredible read, easily one of the best books Stephen King has ever written. I mean, there's still loads of his that I've not read, and probably it could give this a run for its money at least. But wow, what a book this is. Thoroughly enjoyed it. But now I'm going to be taking a small break from King to return to the world of Alien Isolation. So I said in one of my recent reviews that I was reading the Alien Isolation novel based on the video game. Well, now I'm going to be reading Perfect Organism, an Alien Isolation companion. So this is like a documentary in book form that talks about the making of Alien Isolation, and I can't wait to see what Mr. Andy Kelly has to say about this incredible game that is easily the best one I've ever played in my life. But yeah, this is what I'm going to be reading for probably the next week or so, however long it takes me to get through it. Right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me for the review of And Now the Screaming Starts, and I guess And Now the Conclusion Starts.